quick. Okay, so up until today, we've been working in modeling with traditional polygons. However, that's not the only surface type that we have access to here inside of Modo, and it's not the only surface type we want to have access to. Inside the feature film and game art production pipeline, we have access to an exciting new surface called the Subdivision Surface. And this surface ultimately allows us to create some very complex, smooth surfaces that are based around some very rough, simple shapes. Let me show you the benefit of subdivision surfaces, and then we'll go through the application and the construction technique, okay? Because oftentimes people are like, oh, why in the world are we going to learn about subdivision surfaces? Why is it important? Why is it invaluable? Well, let me show you what the benefit of using sub-Ds, as they're called, okay? Subdivision surfaces basically are created from an algorithm. This algorithm is going to smooth out the topology, so the polygons, across the entirety of our mesh, or in my case, the selection that I'm going to make. What this allows us to gain, or to create, is the illusion of a perfect circle, of a perfect surface that doesn't have any sort of visual appearance of polygons and faceted edges, okay? I'm working on a cool little model for the school right now. I'm making an animated logo of our school logo, and if you don't know, at City College, our animated our official school logo is the classic kind of pioneer wagon. It's been around for 100 years. Do you guys know that we're celebrating our 100th anniversary here, not next year, but the year after? It's pretty amazing to think that Sacramento City College has been around for 100 years. We're the oldest community college in the state, which is pretty amazing. Yeah, Amelia Earhart went to school at Sacramento City College, which is pretty cool. Isn't that rad? Yeah, I'm not joking. The aeronautical program at City College is one of the oldest in the nation. And a majority of the folks that went through the aeronautics program in the early days of SEC went on to fight in World War I. They're some of the original aviators of the United States military, which I thought was kind of a cool little nugget of information. Anyways, I digress. So I'm working on an animated logo for the school. This is going to show up in a number of different capacities across our branding materials, and this is the model that's going to be used as a portion, of the final result. And if we look at the wheels real fast, look at the wheels, and specifically around the little hubs on the wheel caps. Check it out. It's pretty faceted. It doesn't necessarily look like a perfect circle going across the circumference of my cylinder here, right? You can see the faceted edges, and specifically what I'm talking about when I say faceted edges are the hard lines, okay? So if you look carefully, there's a whole bunch of corners here, okay? Well, I don't want corners. I want this to be a smooth cylinder to give us the illusion of a perfectly, kind of a cast, if you will, little hub for our Pioneer wagon wheel, okay? So by converting this traditional polygonal model into a subdivision surface model, I'm able to gain that perfection. The sub-D algorithm is going to go in and completely smooth out the topology of my mesh and give me what I'm after. Check out what I'm talking about. Boom. Yeah. Just by one keystroke, I can convert my polygonal cage into a subdivision surface, and you can immediately see that those faceted edges, those hard lines, when the planes change their direction, have been smoothed out, and we get the illusion of a perfect circle, or in our case, a perfect cylinder. Okay.
Did that in vertices?
You can do it in vertices. It's kind of a global operator, global keystroke. We'll go through and talk about how we do this in a minute. But this is the big benefit. We start with a rough polygonal cage, and then we convert that into a subdivision surface, and it smooths out all the edges and gives us the illusion of something that's of a much higher resolution. Yes, sir?
Now, had you started with a cylinder, you wouldn't have had to have done that, would you?
Absolutely. I could have done that. Remember, a traditional polygonal model is defined by its sides, right? How many polygons? If I wanted to create the illusion of a perfect circle where there were no faceted edges, where we couldn't see the changes in planes as it goes around the circumference of the cylinder, I would have had to start it with a cylinder that had like 120 sides. That's like a crazy number of polygons that I now have to work and edit with as I go through the modeling process. Sub-Ds allow us to start with a very simple form, like an 8-sided cylinder, and then transform it into a subdivision surface, which smooths it all out. Okay. Now this is a toggle, so we didn't lose the original polygonal model. Okay. So I can always go back to it. Here it is again. Look at the faceted edges here as it goes across the circumference. Okay. Very noticeable plane change. Shoot, if we just look at it kind of from the side, oops, excuse me, the side, you can see what I'm talking about. Check out the faceted edges. Boom. And it changes shape, changes direction, excuse me, as it goes across the circumference of my cylinder. It doesn't look like a perfect cylinder. It doesn't look like an actual wheel that we're going to encounter out there in the real world. So sub-Ds gain us access to this smoothing algorithm. It's going to smooth out the entire geometry. Okay. Now, one of the other great things about working inside of sub-Ds is that we're not adding any new geometry. Okay. So we're still working with a relatively low polygonal surface, which is very nice. You know, you guys know my mantra: mo polygons, mo problems. Okay. The more polygons you have on your mesh, the more problems that you're more than likely going to encounter across the modeling stage. Okay. So we like to model, and I certainly like to model with as few polygons as I can, then access this exciting new surface type to give me the result that I'm ultimately after. Okay. Now, sub-Ds work on a number of different surfaces, so we're not limited to working with them with just cylinders. Here's a custom shape that includes some very specific arcs that were modeled into the surface of the geometry. Currently, it's enabled as a subdivision surface, and you can see across the surface of my mesh here, check it out. This line right in here is almost perfectly smooth, okay? We like that. That's the result that we want to have. However, if we were to look at the original unsubdivided polygonal cage, check it out. We can very, very easily see all the faceted edges in the low resolution nature of this object. Okay, really, that entire arc has been generated by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 edges. That's it. But when we transform it into a subdivision surface, boom! Now it has the resolution and the appearance of something that has maybe 80 or 90 edges to make that perfect arc. Okay. Subdivision surfaces are everywhere. The algorithms, the tools, and the workflow have been defined and kind of refined over the last 20 years, and it's gotten us to a point where you see them everywhere. Okay, they are the industry standard surface. They're not going away anytime soon. All of the major feature films that you see out there on the big screen are using subdivision surfaces in a big way to create the illusions that you're seeing on the screen. Often the most apparent illusion of this is in characters. Let me show you an example. I'm going to open up my, my preset browser here for a second. And let me just close this out. My computer's thinking about it. I'm live streaming. Oh, Modo crashed. So it happens when you have a really intense model on a laptop that's also live streaming at the same time. Yeah, some days it doesn't really give us the results that we're after. Okay, so let me open up my preset browser here real fast. And I'm going to go into my models section. Items, nope, not items. Oh, come on. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to go into the layout browser. Here we go. And let's do characters. Now, I just want to show this as an example. I want human, and let me grab good old Ben Kingsley here. There we go. Here's Ben Kingsley. This is a model, it's a low resolution model of Sir Ben Kingsley, the actor. If you look carefully, you can kind of see the resemblance of Ben Kingsley. You guys know the actor Ben Kingsley? Famous actor. He was the Mandarin, you know, in the most recent Iron Man film. Okay, there's a low-resolution sculpt of,
Trevor.
Yeah, right. And you know, he played Gandhi. He's probably most famous. I think he won an Oscar for his role as Gandhi. Anyways, this is the model, a low-resolution model of his face. And if you look carefully at the surface of the mesh, it is incredibly smooth. Okay. We're not really seeing any sort of apparent facets as we go along the topology of my mesh, okay? Characters probably get the biggest benefit from working with subdivision surfaces. Let me turn off sub-Ds and take a look at the original polygonal shape. Now we can see, check out the nose, okay? We can see each individual polygon and surface that's being used to construct the nose. However, if we go back into sub-Ds, it's entirely smoothed out, and those polygons, or the illusion of those polygons, are removed through the sub-D algorithm. Okay. Characters play. Let me show you another example. Characters get the biggest benefit out of this. Let's look at. Let's go into some animals. Let's grab the standard Modo rhino. Here's the Modo rhino. Take a look at this guy. Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty cool model, right? It's got a lot of details on it. It's a lot of compound curves flowing across the surface of the mesh, okay? It's beautifully modeled. It's beautifully modeled. However, this is a sub-D surface. If we were to convert this back into its original polygonal form, look at the madness. Look at the madness of the shape, okay? The sub-D algorithm is smoothing out all of those polygons and giving us a much higher quality result, okay? Just look at the ears. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Question.
You might be getting into this, but is there, can you explain why there's all these, when you change it out of this stuff, why there's all these seams or polygons completely hollow?
Yeah, and they're really not completely hollow. There's some torques in the polygons that are causing the OpenGL rendering engine to really not understand how to draw them. Yeah, absolutely. So if we were to open up a little RayGL action here, and hit the tab key, boom, they're back. Okay. If we go into the actual render preview window,
Is that Ben Kingsley between his front legs?
let's see. It is Ben Kingsley between his front legs. I love it. That's awesome. So hit the tab key. A little bit of a nightmare in here. Yeah, I am of the modeling practice where I try to not model my shape that produces those render errors, because that's really what it is. The rendering engine doesn't know how to draw that polygon because there's like a torque in it. Okay, so it goes, I don't know what this plane looks like, so I'm not going to draw it. Yeah. So this is a good example of the benefits of sub-Ds, although it's a bad example of probably how we should model our characters. So we should never have, kind of torques in our polygons, and like we see here. That's not how we want to do things. That's kind of bad form, in my opinion. The result, it looks good, but I'm kind of old school like that, I guess. All right. Let's talk about how we can work with these subdivision surfaces kind of locally, and really the big benefits of these exciting new surface types. Okay, so I just have a new scene here, and I'm going to make a very, very low resolution cylinder within my scene. And when I mean low resolution, I mean like a 6-sided cylinder. Okay, bam, there it is. That's what we're going to start with, a very, very simple shape. Let's go ahead and transform it, if you will, into a 3-dimensional model. And I have one segment. I'm going to sneeze. Woo, excuse me. I'm going to apologize for the folks watching the video of this later because it just sounded like an explosion in the live stream. Okay. All right. So here's my very, very simple cylinder. Okay. Clearly, this doesn't look like a cylinder, right? This is what it's not what hexagon, right? Hexagon is a 6-sided shape, right? This is a hexagon. Is it hexa? Am I right? Is it hexa, Riley? Yeah, okay. Because pentagon's 5, hexa is 6. I want to say hepa is 7, right? And then octagon is 8, okay. I'm going to make a duplicate of this shape just by copying and pasting it within inside of my scene, just so we can understand the process and the practice and the benefit of this exciting new surface type. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but it's so incredibly useful that we're going to talk about it again. I want to make a duplicate of this shape here. Now, there's a number of ways that we can duplicate things inside of Modo, but let me show you an old school technique that makes it really, really fast. Okay, Modo is because Modo has been developed recently within the past 10 years. The guys down at Luxology understand that there's an entire history of computer usage that kind of dictate certain actions. Duplication is just more, it's a copy and we're pasting it, right? So if we went to the top of the screen and we copied our mesh using the same keyboard shortcuts that we're used to seeing in like Microsoft Word. Here we go, copy. And then if we go edit, paste, we now have two. If we were to fire off the move tool immediately, the second one will be selected. So now I have two. Now I have two, okay? And for illustration purposes, I'm just going to delete the tops and the bottoms of our cylinders. I think that will be a better way of working. Okay, so this one over here on the left, this is going to be our standard polygon one. This is going to be polys. This is polys. Woo! Okay, and then this one's going to be sub Ds. That one. Okay? Check it out. To transform any surface into a subdivision surface, as always, it begins and ends with a selection. I've selected my right-hand cylinder there, and simply hitting the Tab key on your keyboard is going to transform that surface into a subdivision surface. Okay? And you can see the result that we have here on the screen. Okay? And right there, that example right there is why we love subdivision surfaces. This cylinder is 6 sides, okay? It really is. This is a 6-sided cylinder, yet when we apply the smoothing algorithm, we get the illusion of a cylinder that maybe is like 120 sides. Yeah?
When I hit the tab key, it doesn't turn it into a cylinder, it turns it into like a bullet shape.
Yeah. So if you're getting a really funky result, hang tight. We're going to talk about it, okay? What we're doing here when we're hitting the tab key is that we're asking the entire surface to be influenced by this algorithm, including that top polygon and the bottom polygon, which is why I deleted them, just so to get them out of the mix. This is a toggle, okay? This is a toggle. So if I wanted to remove the subdivision surface algorithm from that cylinder on the right, what do I got to do? Select it, and then do what? Tab. You got it. Like that. Okay? So it's an on-off. FYI. This is something that will get people in a bind pretty quickly. The tab key really looks at what's selected in your scene. Okay? If nothing is selected in your scene, what's going to happen when I hit the tab key? Everything is going to get subdivided. Okay? Check it out. So nothing's selected in my scene, and then when I hit the tab key, both of my cylinders get smoothed out. So watch this. In addition, here's another landmine that often blows up in people's faces, okay? They'll have just one polygon selected, and they'll hit the tab key, and this is what happens, okay? It's subdivided just that one polygon. So you have to be very, very, very aware of what's selected when you hit the tab key, okay? Only you can prevent forest fires, okay? I can't control what you click on and when you hit the tab key. So just please be aware when you're hitting that tab key, okay? Luckily for us, the problem or the resolution to our problem is simple. How do I get it back? Tab, okay? It's just a toggle. It's on and it's off. Riley.
When you subdivide that one, can you subdivide that further to make that oval smoother? Or would you have to start with a new
So you want to make this even more smooth.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you could make that smoother without making a new polygon?
You could. There is this thing called subdivision levels, which determines how smooth, if you will. And smooth is just kind of this week's term. We're going to continue to expand upon this entire workflow over the next 8 weeks to really understand sub-D modeling. So the answer to your question is yes. Yes. But it's done at a mesh item level, not on a polygon level. Okay. If you want to explore it, you absolutely can. With your mesh item selected inside your Properties tab, down here at the bottom, you see how we got this subdivision level? That's the value that determines how smoothed out this entire system goes. Okay? It's an incredibly powerful system. Yes, sir. Question?
I was tinkering. I noticed that you can actually take and select certain polygons and just refine those.
And just refine those. That is dangerous. It's dangerous, okay? I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it. It's kind of one of those bad technique type things, okay? They've given us the ability, but It's dangerous, okay?
Why is that?
Well, check it out, okay? You're gonna have a hole in your surface, okay? If I subdivide just one polygon, I have a hole, okay? I have a hole in my surface, okay? That's bad.
What I did is I went around the rim
Mm-hmm.
and the surface part and rounded the edges
Yeah.
like a drum stand.
That's still, I would call that kind of bad form, because we're mixing and matching the surface type within a single mesh, okay? What we want to have happen is it's kind of an all or nothing thing, okay? This discontiguous piece is either entirely a subdivision surface or it's not, okay? You can mix and match sub-Ds within your scene. That's fine. I do it a lot, actually. If it's a planar surface that doesn't need to be subdivided, it's not being subdivided in my world, okay? So you can mix and match, but one continuous piece is going to be subdivided or it's not, okay? In addition, we also shouldn't be relying entirely on the subdivision smoothing algorithm to define the shape, okay? We still should be using our traditional modeling tools that we've been exploring over the past couple weeks to create the form and the shape. This is just going to smooth it out. So in your mind, when you hit the tab key, you're just smoothing out all the edges, okay? We're not using this to define a shape or to create the form. We're smoothing that form out, okay? It really is. It really is. And if you looked back, if you remember at my Pioneer wagon, you saw the model in its entirety. You saw all the shapes, and I was using the subdivision smoothing algorithm just to kind of finish it off, smooth out all the hard edges, and make it perfect. Okay, that's how we want to use sub-Ds. However, at times, they turn into a little bit of a challenge to work with. And there are some techniques that we have to honor and recognize to work with these really cool shapes. I've deleted the two cylinders that I had on screen a moment ago, and I think I'm just going to add a unit primitive cube into the mix. Okay? So here's my little cube. And let's do this. I want to copy and paste that cube like I did earlier. So I have two cubes. Now check this action out. Okay? I'm going to subdivide the right one. Boom. A little bit of a problem, okay? I selected the entirety of the rightmost cube and hit the tab key, and look what happened, okay? Is this a cube? No, it's no longer a cube. I think they refer to this as a quad ball now, okay? It's a sphere with 6 sides, okay? So we need to go over the practice. Often we want to use sub-Ds to give us the perfect smoothing around edges, okay? But we need to kind of honor a principle and an idea, oops, so that we retain the shape, okay? I want to show you something that will illustrate what we're going after here. Whenever we're modeling something in computer graphics, often what we're trying to create along the edges of our model are small little radiuses, okay? So small little curves. If you look at our surface of our cube here, it's very flat. The transition between that top plane and that front plane, perfectly 90 degrees, okay? We do not have the manufacturing capability in the world right now to make a perfect 90-degree corner. We don't, okay? We don't. We physically don't. Even on my fancy 3D printer, I cannot make a perfect 90-degree edge like this here. There's always going to be some sort of small little radius, okay? The drill bits, the tooling that we use to make cubes are always going to leave a small little rounded edge. Sometimes it's microscopic. You won't even see it to the naked eye, but it's there, okay? It's always there, just sometimes they're very tiny. Our human subconscious and our eyeballs and our brain are so used to seeing rounded edges that the moment they don't have one, we reject that shape as being real, okay? Those small little rounded corners, believe it or not, are going to add a little bit of realism to the scene. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to continuing to use the cube tool, I'm just going to make a simple little ground plane. That way I have some shadows that I can generate for my little cubes, okay? And on this one, check it out. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to grab all of its edges just by double clicking on each one of these planes here. And I want to use the Bevel Tool, okay? In addition, the Bevel Tool changes its behavior based on what we have selected, okay? Some of you discovered this when you were working with the corkboard a couple weeks ago by selecting a few of the edges. You could use the bevel tool to round out those edges. Okay, check it out. I'm going to use the same keyboard modifier, same keyboard shortcut that I used before with the polygonal bevel tool. Yet, however, this time I'm using it to round out all the corners along my cube. Okay, the action handle in the center of my screen is going to influence the radius of the bevel that I'm creating. And then specifically, if you look at the edge bevel options, the round level determines the quality of that radius. So by increasing this, let me make the round bigger so you guys can see. By increasing this value, we add more edges into the mix, making it more perfect. Okay, the radius more perfect. And if we were to keep it at 0, that's what we get, something very, very basic. Personally, I never go above a round level of 2 or 3. You're not going to see the benefit of adding that much geometry onto the mesh, so just kind of keep that in mind. All right, small little radius here.
Can you go over that process one more time?
Yeah, I just had all the edges selected. Okay, let me go select that backside once more. Yeah, I got all the edges of my cube selected, okay, and then I just activated the bevel tool. Depending on which component type you have selected, the bevel tool is going to change its operation. So fire off bevel, click, here's the blue handle, and then I left click and drag, and it's just going to round out the edges on that shape. All right, so this cube over here, no rounded edges. The one to the right, very small little radiuses. Let's check out the render here real fast. Okay, now it is subtle. It is very subtle. But which one of these looks a little bit more compelling? The one on the right. Yeah. What do we gain with the on the cube on the right? What is your brain seeing that's saying, hey, this looks a little bit more real than the one on the left?
Highlights on the edges.
Yeah, those specular highlights are reminding us of the direction of the light source in the scene, right? Subconsciously, we are programmed to see these edges here because of the wonderful specular highlights that are running down those edges, okay? We want this. We want this as much as we can. It feels more real. Let's go back into my model tab, and I'm going to copy that cube one more time. So edit, copy, edit, paste. I'm going to activate the move tool and move it over to the left. All right. So let's give these guys a little bit of color here. This one, the red one, is going to be the original object. The one in the center, it'll be blue. This is going to be a subdivision surface. And the one on the end here, it's going to be green. And this is going to be a straight up polygonal surface that has a whole series of edge bevels applied to it to give us the illusion of that rounding. Okay, let's actually change the color here. Red, blue, oops. Go. And then green. All right. Okay. Check this action out. If I want to focus my attention on the blue one for the time being. Yep. And let's talk about how we can use the subdivision surface algorithm to smooth out the corners, okay, to give us the exact same illusion as we had on the green one, the one with the rounded edges, right? The one that I used the edge bevel tool on, okay? In its current form, if I was just hit the tab key, boom, that's what would happen, right? Boo, we don't want this. This is not the result that we want. We want it to still retain its original shape. We just want to smooth out the edges, okay? So here's the rule. If we want to do what's called shoring up the edges, and if we want to retain as much of the original shape as we can, we need 3 edges to define a plane. To define a plane change. We're going to direct our efforts on the topmost polygon. So this one up here, and then this one right there. Okay, so this is the plane change that we're going to define. Okay, in its current form, you can see that we have one edge already there. And then specifically what I'm talking about is this edge running down the back of my cube. So one of the three edges are already there. The middle edge, in my mind, is the original edge on that surface. So we need to add two more edges into the mix so that we can keep this original shape but gain those small little radiuses around the top of our cube. Where we place these two new edges is critically important. The original one is the middle one in your mind and in my mind, okay? We need to add an edge above it and an edge below it. Grand total of 3, okay? Once we have those 3 edges into the mix, we're going to shore up that plane change and kind of keep all that stuff from happening. So we need to add an edge above the original, which is up here. So we need an edge up here. And then we also need an edge down there. Okay? So how do we do that? Well, there's a number of tools that allow us to slice up our model and add new edges into the mix. Today I want to introduce you to one of my favorites. I use it a lot. It's called Loop Slice. And Loop Slice is an excellent tool for kind of globally affecting a number of polygons along our mesh. To really understand how Loop Slice is used and the product of this tool, first we've got to understand what a loop is, right? Does anyone know what a loop of geometry is? Let me show you what a loop of geometry is. It's really easy to see. A loop of geometry is kind of like a row of polygons. If you look carefully at my little cube here, on my polygonal selection set, I have a number of loops flowing around, number of rows of polygons that are flowing around 3 different axes on my mesh. So there's a polygon. It's connected to one over here, which is connected to the bottom one, which is connected to that one. That's a loop. It's a row of polygons that travels all the way around the mesh and connects back onto itself. Okay? That's a loop. And we actually have 3 separate loops of polygons on this geometry. You can see that one flowing across the z-axis. Here's another one. Goes from there to there to there to the one in the back. Okay? So if you really think about it, what's happening here is that we're defining kind of a circle. So it goes across the geometry of our mesh. Across the circumference of our mesh. So in order for what the loop slice is going to do, it's going to analyze that entire row of geometry and add a new edge segment somewhere along the width of that row, okay, of that loop. Using the loop slice tool is relatively easy. It does require you, however, to select 2 or more polygons along that loop. So I'm going to select the top one and then the front one. You just got to select 2, okay? You don't have to select the entire loop, just 2. Once those 2 polygons are selected, you can go over to the Mesh Edit tab, and let me zoom in so you guys can see what's going on. So we're going to Mesh Edit, and then there it is right there, Loop Slice. Keyboard shortcut Alt-C. This is a good one to commit to memory as we're going to be using this a lot, okay? A lot. Loop Slice. Once we activate the tool, we need to examine a few of its properties before we can apply the tool to the scene. We have 3 different modes that the loop slice is going to work within. That mode is going to determine where on our row of polygons these new edge segments are going to be generated. We'll talk about their role here momentarily. I just want to direct your attention to the count. The count value is going to determine how many new polygon or new edges are going to be generated. I don't want 5 new edge loops to be generated. I want maybe 1 new edge loop to be generated. Okay, so I'm going to change my count down to 1. There we go. And I'm going to leave my mode at uniform, which is the middle one in that list. Now that I have my settings kind of dialed, check it out. Simply left clicking in the OpenGL viewport is going to apply the tool. Now, admittedly, I gotta apologize. On this small little projector, it's probably difficult to see. But if you look on your screen, or if you can see on mine, we've actually infused a new edge segment that cruises all the way around our model and wraps back onto itself. Specifically, if you're having a hard time seeing it, It's right there, okay? And then it goes all the way down that way, and then across our mesh. Oops, excuse me. Okay? It's a really cool tool, and what it allows us to do is to slice our geometry along that row of polygons that we had selected. Can everyone see that? Yeah, everyone kind of, yeah, okay, great. All right. This is a live tool, by the way. So any change that we make to our tool options while the tool is still activated will immediately be shown inside of our viewport, including how many edges we're going to be infusing. So if I increase the count to 2, check it out. Now we have 2 new edge segments that are cruising around that row of polygons on our mesh. I'm going to drive this up to 5, just so you guys can see the product of the uniform mode. Remember, there's 3 different modes that this tool can work with. Uniform is going to get you what you see on the screen right here. And what do all these edge loops look like to you? Is there a pattern here? Is there a method to the madness? Look carefully.
They're all equal sections?
They're all evenly spaced, okay? When your mode is set to uniform, all of those new loops are going to be evenly spaced across the width of that loop, okay? So the distance between that edge and that edge is the exact same distance between that and that one and that one and that one. They're all uniformly spaced, okay? Uniformly spaced, which is pretty cool. In contrast, let's change the mode. I want to change the mode. Oops, excuse me. I want to change the mode to free. Now, when your mode is set to free, you're in the driver's seat. Okay. Now check this out. Okay. If you look very closely at the top of my screen here, you can probably see this kind of purpley pink line, and has a whole bunch of cyan little triangles roaming along that little purple line. Okay. The location of those triangles are a direct representation of the location of the new edge loops along that row. So if I was to change the location of those triangles in free mode, I can interactively choose where I want to place all these these new edge loops across the geometry of my scene. Check it out. So I'm going to grab it and left click and drag, and if you look carefully down in my viewport, you can see that I'm interactively choosing where that edge is going to go. Okay? When you're in the free mode, you're in the driver's seat. You get to control where all these edge loops are going to be generated when you use the loop slice tool. Okay, it's incredibly powerful. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy using loop slice. It allows us to slice up our geometry quickly and get a result that's going to work for Subdivision. Okay, I want to drop the tool and hit undo just to kind of get us back to our original configuration here, and I want to show you the final mode, and it's called Symmetry. Symmetry is best used when you have a count of 2. So when we're adding 2 new loops or 2 new edge loops into the mix here. Okay, check it out. With the mode set to symmetry, with the count set to 2. Check it out. Now, when I left click and drag, what's happening to the location of those new edge loops? They're moving together, and I'm just left clicking and dragging here. Okay, I can also grab the little triangle at the top and move it that way. That works too. But since they're symmetrically being placed or sliced across that row of polygons, let me drop the tool and drop the selection. Okay, check it out. So there's that new one. Here's another one. This distance over here is the exact same distance between that we got over there. Okay, so they've been symmetrically sliced. This makes adding new edge loops into along our surfaces really fast and easy, especially when we're trying to add subdivision surfaces into the mix. Okay, so let's go back to what we're going to before. In order to shore up the geometry and get us the result that we want, we need to have 3 edges, right? The original edge is the middle one. Then we have to have a new edge above it and a new edge below it. If you look at what we've created so far, here's the original. We have a new edge above, and now we need to add a new edge below it. So what am I going to do here? How am I going to get a new edge that flows this way across the mesh. Yeah, Mika's right. We got to add a loop going the opposite direction. So walk me through the process of adding a loop slice or using loop slice on my mesh here. What's the first thing we have to do? Select it, yeah. Now, which loops are we going to select? Around it, yeah. The ones going like this, around our cube, okay? I always think of the orientation or the direction that we loop things in kind of like a river, okay? So it's flowing around our mesh like a river, okay? If I wanted to divide that river into a whole bunch of smaller rivers, you got to select the direction that you want to go in. Now we can activate loop slice. Count of 2, mode set to symmetry. Check it out. Drop the tool, and let's look at what we've created. Now that we've done 2 successful loop slice operations, we have 1 edge loop, or 1 edge, 2 edge, and 3 edge. Okay? This is the minimum number of edges that we have to have in order to retain this shape when we hit the tab key. Let's check out the result. Let me hit the tab key real fast. All right, and we're getting there. If you look carefully, we were kind of shoring up that section and that section, but holy moly, it's kind of smoothed out like crazy over here, right? So what do we need to do? We got to add more geometry. And what's the principle? What's the idea? If we wanted to shore up an edge so that it retains its original shape when we hit the tab key, where do we have to place new edges? Above and below. Grand total of how many? 3, right? 3 edges. Grand total of 3 edges. Okay? I always think of it like this. This is the only way that I think the simplest way for me to describe it. We have the original edge in red here. Okay? And then in order to shore up that plane, we have to add a new one above it and a new one below it, for a grand total of 3. Okay, 3 edges. Say again?
Like Bondo.
Bondo?
Yeah, for doing body work, you have to put material there to get the shape.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, with that said, if we look carefully at our mesh here, this loop is the culprit. Let's examine the structure here and get a better understanding as to why the problem exists in its current location. So here's the original edge going that way, right? If you look carefully, the previous loop slice operation yielded us an edge below the original, right? So what do we have to do here? Edge above it, you got it. So if we look carefully, we need to have another edge cruising down to my scene like that in order to shore up this entire section. Let's clear all this monkey business out. I'm going to select a couple of the polygons along that loop. Okay, and actually I've selected the wrong loop. Let's go this way. Run loop slice, count of 2. There it is. And now if you look carefully at what's been created on the scene, we have 1, 2, 3. Rock and roll. That's what we want. Zoom out a little bit here. Hit the tab key. Huzzah. Mission accomplished. Okay? We've retained the original shape, but we're getting small little radiuses along each one of those plane changes that are reminding our subconscious of the location of the directional light or our light source within the scene, and it's just making it feel more real. Let's turn the rest of our objects onto the scene and take a look at what's happening here. Let's jump back over into our render. And if we look, here are our three. Here are the three tools that were, or excuse me, the three. I'm not being really dorky here. Okay, there we go. There are the 3 cubes that we were working with. Okay, the green one was created with the edge bevel. You You can see its result here. The blue one was created with our subdivision surface smoothing algorithm. We added some new geometry into the mix, and we're getting a very subtle reminder of those little radiuses, rock and roll. It's pretty good. And then the red one is the original untouched cube, and it looks very false, very computer generated, and it doesn't have that air of reality that's making my brain think that this is a photograph. It looks computer generated, looks false, fake, no likey, okay? One of the big advantages of working with subdivision surfaces is that it allows us to use very simple slicing tools in conjunction with that tab tool to yield us a pretty cool result. In addition, we're also generating fewer polygons than its partner. If you look at the green one was generated with an edge bevel, and currently at the moment it has 150 polygons on it. Okay. Now, if you want to know how I know that, if you go to the bottom right-hand corner of your OpenGL viewport, that little number right there shows you how many polygons you currently have selected, and you can see this as 150. Okay? So 150 polygons for the green guy. If we were to double-click on the blue one, right now, that same thing is telling me I have 54 polygons, okay? So it's a third the polygonal weight, but we're getting the exact same result, okay? Exact same result. By adding a couple little strategically placed slices into the surface of our mesh, we're able to yield the exact same result of a mesh that has 3 times the number of polygons. Rock and roll. That's the power of subdivision surfaces. In addition, let's look at how we can edit our subdivision surfaces, okay? What if my art director comes in and says, Pat, you've done a phenomenal job. I love the 3 cubes that you've made. This is just absolutely phenomenal, okay? However, I really don't like that radius. I want it to be bigger. I want it to be a much larger radius. I want it to be 8 times the size of its current shape. So instead of having a radius that looks kind of like this, okay? Okay, along that edge, I want to have a radius that looks like that, bigger, much bigger radius, okay? Well, when you're using the edge bevel tool, it completely destroys your original mesh because we're adding a lot of geometry in there. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So this is the polygon, or this is the cube that I use to generate this is the cube that I used edge bevel on to generate this result. And as you can see, it physically trashed the original model and added a whole bunch of new polygons and new edges into the mix. It looks pretty good, but how in the world can I edit this to make a larger radius? Well, the answer is you can't. Not easily. In order to change the radius of this curve or of this transition here, you have to delete all of that geometry that you added back in. It's not like you can just move this stuff. You can't scale it, okay? You can't scale it. The size of my cube needs to be the same, so it's not like I can go in and grab all of my polygons here and scale it up, mission accomplished. No, can't do that, okay? I got to make these guys in here bigger, okay? Well, when you use the edge bevel, you can't do it. Okay, well, you can, but you're going to have to go in and delete a lot of stuff. Okay, what if this is a really complex mesh, like my little Pioneer wagon that I showed you earlier, or the Jeep that I showed you a couple weeks ago? I don't want making a small little change to the radiuses of my geometry would require a tremendous amount of work. I almost have to almost rebuild that piece over again just to change the radius of that curve, okay, or of that plane transition. When you use edge bevel, you destroy your mesh, okay? There is no point of, there is no editability of that radius on top of going in and deleting all of those new edges. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I know from my experience that right there, those guys are the original edges. So if I wanted to go in and get this back to where it was, I'd have to delete all those guys, and then delete that one, and then delete that one. Okay, you can see there's a lot of work already, and then I got to go over here and do the exact same thing. That one and that one are going to go, and I got to go down to the bottom of the mesh, kind of do the exact same thing, and you can already see how horrible of a process this is going to be, okay? Anytime you have to do the exact same thing over and over and over again, you always infuse the opportunity for human error to rear its ugly head, okay? This is bad modeling. This is bad form, okay? And let's see. Have I done a good job? Let's test it. Yep, 6 polygons. I'm back to the original shape. But that was a lot of effort to get back to that original shape, okay? Back to a place where I can make the change, okay? The great thing about working with edge or loop slices in the sub-D method is that if we wanted to increase the radius and get the result that I've drawn here on the board, I don't need to delete the edges that are currently existing on my mesh. I just need to change their location. If you examine the way the edges have been placed along the surface of my geometry, we haven't actually changed the overall form, okay? We've only added edges to the inside of the squares. We haven't changed their original plane changes, okay? So if you look carefully, we have a plane that goes this way, and then it makes that 90-degree curve. If you remember back to the earlier example, the plane changes that we had with the cube that was generated with edge bevel did that, and then it went yoink, 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 and then it got straight, okay? Each one of these being a new plane, okay? So check this action out. This is actually, oops, excuse me. This is actually kind of cool. So if I wanted to increase the radius, excuse me, I'm going to go in and just select pairs of edges. So if I grab those two guys, activate the scale tool, I can just use the X handle here to scale them in. And let's just scale them into a value of 90%. I'm going to do everything to a value of 90%. You got to do this in pairs, okay? That way you retain the uniformity across the mesh. This time, I'm going to scale it into a value of 90% across the Z-axis. And then last but not least, let's grab that one, scale it into a value of roughly 90%. And now, I've changed the radius, okay? It's not perfect, but it's a start. It allows us to very quickly go in and start to change the way this cube looks in conjunction with all the other ones, okay? Subdivision surfaces, when you use loop slice, are highly, highly editable, and that's what we want, okay? We want to be able to very quickly go in, add loops where we need them to shore up the edges and retain the shape of the original form, but we also want to preserve the ability to go back in and make a change when it happens. Not if it happens, when it happens, okay? You're kind of hedging your bets. You're modeling your scene in a way that gives you the high quality result, but in a structure that's editable, quickly editable, okay? Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about how we use subdivision surfaces to create a higher quality result. Let's look at another example real fast, and we'll take a small little break, okay? I'm going to nuke my scene here, and let's just make a new scene. And inside this scene, we're going to do this with cylinders, okay? 6-sided cylinder. All right. So there we go. Hit the tab key, goes into a ball. I don't want it to go into a ball like it does here. Okay, I want to basically retain the original length of my guy. So what I'm talking about is that I want to retain, this dimension in here. This length needs to stay the same. However, what I do want to change, excuse me, is I just want to smooth out all of these guys. So help me out. Let's walk through the process of adding geometry in to shore up the original plane changes, okay? So if I wanted to smooth this guy out using subdivision surfaces, where would I have to add some geometry? What's the rule? How many edges total do we need? 3. Where are we going to place those 3 edges?
On the original edge.
So we got the original edge. There's one.
On either side of it.
On either side. So above and below. Okay? Grand total of 3. Grand total of 3. Okay? Specifically, I want to focus my attention on this loop right here. So it wraps around the mesh and connects back onto itself. There's the loop. what tool will allow me to very quickly infuse a loop into the mix? Loop slice. Loop slice. Okay? It's going to slice up those polygons and add new edges into the model. So you can find loop slice and mesh edit. Mesh edit. Right there, loop slice. If you look at the tool options here, we're in the mode of symmetry, count of 2, which is exactly what we want. And then I simply left click and drag to place those loops across the surface of my mesh. That looks pretty good. If we were to go into edge mode, let me just select them here real fast so you can see the 2 new loops that I've added. If we examine the structure of our model up here at the front, we're getting closer and closer and closer to what we want. Here's the original edge. We just added a new one into the mix. So where do we have to add in a whole nother one? Grand total of 3. So where are we going to add it? Yeah, so and I'm gonna interpret your top being in here, right? Yeah. Okay. Let me just hit the tab key as is so you can see what's going on. And we're getting there. Okay, we're getting there. You can see that as the polygons get smoothed out across the circumference of my cylinder, we're getting the result that we want, but this radius in here is really extreme. I don't want it to be that extreme. We need to add more geometry. So I need to slice up that guy right there. How are we going to do this? Because it's not a loop, right? It's a flat plane, but I need to add an additional edge around that plane. Does anyone have any ideas? Bevel.
Geometry, do you do that shortcut?
What shortcut would that be?
If I can remember it. Shift.
So Shift D, no, don't do that. Don't do that, okay? Don't do that, because Shift D is going to take one polygon and turn it into 4. You only really want to do that on planar shapes, or specifically cubes, okay? Don't do it on this one, okay? It's going to fail every single time. I don't like using Shift D. Like I almost never use Shift D, okay? Because it'll get you into some trouble. Anytime you use a global operator like that, you're kind of taking the success out of your hands and into the computers. So here's what I would suggest, and I heard someone mention it. Bevel. Bevel does a great job, because what are you doing when you use the bevel tool, a polygonal bevel tool? You're adding more geometry. You're adding more edges. Check it out. Watch what happens. Okay, so I got that top polygon selected on my cylinder. If I fire off the bevel tool and just give it a little bit of an inset, boom, the red handle. Check it out. Now what we're generating is a new row of polygons that are wrapping around the top of our cylinder, these guys. And if you look at the product of this, check it out. Here's the original. We have one below the original, and then one edge loop above the original. Rock and roll. This is what we want. Mission accomplished. Let's clear all this out, zoom out, hit the tab key, and see what we've gotten. And now we're there. Okay. What we've generated on the front here is a much sharper radius, okay? A much sharper plane change from the circumference, the sides of our cylinder, onto what I would call the front of our cylinder. And if you compare that radius to the one on the back that we didn't do, you can see the difference on the screen. Okay, this one's got a very, very slow slope to it, and this one's got a quick slope. Okay, sharper edge, if you will. Questions so far? Everyone's good. Everyone understands the basic idea, the basic principle behind it. What's your question? Okay. Let's continue to extend this a little bit, because there's some additional geometry that we can construct to kind of, I think, better understand the application of this entire technique. What if I wanted to make like an opening, like a cannon, for example? Okay, well, check it out. I can do that pretty quickly. I can continue using the bevel tool just to flesh out the shape that I'm after. There we go. I'll hold down the shift key, click. There we go, and that'll be the opening to my cannon.
What did you just do?
I just repeated the bevel tool. Yeah, so you don't have to drop the tool to reapply it. Okay.
How do you reapply it? You don't drop it.
Shift, click.
Shift, click what? Click what?
So here's the tool, right?
Okay.
Regular operation. If I wanted to reapply the bevel tool, shift, just click on the anywhere outside of the tool handles in your viewport. And then you can continue to reapply the tool. Shift, click, anywhere outside the handles is good, and you're on our way. Okay, so there's my cool little shape. It's a little cannon with a button on the inside of it. I don't know. All right. So if I hit the tab key at the moment, this is what we're getting, okay? Now this up here is looking pretty good, but it smooths out the geometry pretty quick as it goes onto the interior of the cannon. So what do I need to do in order to shore up all those edges and get those sharp plane changes like I have on the outside of the cannon? Yeah, we've got to add more geometry. And specifically, we have to add more geometry in very specific locations. Okay, I want to do this one. Okay, this plane change here. So from that polygon or that loop of polygons into that loop of polygons. Okay, this outside one, I'm just going to use loop slice. There we go. And I'm just going to add a loop right down in there. Bam, there it is. This inside one, I'll do the exact same thing. Just fire off loop slice. I put my count down to 1. I've also changed my mode to free. You don't necessarily have to use symmetry. You can just do them one at a time. And now, with those two simple operations, here's the original edge. I've added one below, or one above, and one below. Okay, let's zoom out for a second. Hit the tab key, and now we're getting there. Okay, that plane change, that surface has now been defined by those additional edges. Oops. There we go. So now I need to do all this mumbo jumbo down here in the back. Select it with a couple polygons along the loop. Rock and roll, a little loop slice action. And we're on our way. It goes pretty quick once you start getting in. All right. On the surface, subdivision surfaces are magical. Seems as though we're generating a pretty cool mesh from very, very simple beginnings. If you think about it, this still is, at the foundation, a 6-sided cylinder. That's all it is, okay? With very few polygons across the surface of our geometry, it makes it very, very easy to edit, very easy to control. If this was a cylinder that has 120 sides, oh my gosh, my mind would be I'd be in edit hell right now, okay? Because the more points and the more polygons you have on your scene or have on your model, the more problems you're going to have when it comes to editing those shapes and those polygons, okay? So it seems magical, this little tab key, but there are some limitations, okay? If you look carefully at my scene here, I'm going to zoom in so you guys can maybe get a little bit larger perspective as to what I'm talking about. The Sub-D engine only goes so far, okay? It can only do so much with a small amount of geometry in the scene. It's kind of difficult, and I apologize if you're following along and kind of making this model as I am. You'll probably see that there's some faceted edges here along the surface. So it's not, for this week, it's not the be-all, end-all, okay? But it allows us to make some very, very cool results with some very, very simple geometry. Now, we're getting those faceted edges because I'm using a 6-sided cylinder. If I was using a 12-sided cylinder, you wouldn't see those faceted edges, okay? Increasing the number of polygons across the mesh is going to give you higher quality results, okay? Questions? Everyone's good? Everyone kind of generally understand it? Generally? Okay, cool. We're going to get our hands dirty with this here in a minute in our lab. I'll tell you what, let's take a very, very short, and I mean a micro short break. Okay, 5 minutes, get up, stretch your legs, use the restroom real fast, and we'll come back in and start working on our lab, okay? Okie dokie. So let's get back together real fast and talk about what we're going to be accomplishing for both our homework and our lab assignment this week. We're going to do the lab here. It shouldn't take you that long, as it'll be a short lab assignment that just kind of gets us up and running with working with subdivision surfaces. For our lab assignment this week, we're going to be making a Lego brick. Woo! Okay. Legos. I love Legos. My childhood is can be completely described by Legos. So I was excited to generate some Legos in 3D. Your mission this week is to generate some Legos in 3Ds, but I want you to look very, very carefully at the results that I'm asking you guys to generate. Okay? There's cylinders and there's cubes. Okay? Both of which don't contain any sort of visual indication of faceted polygons. At the conclusion of this project, of this little mini project, you're going to have a number of subdivision surfaces. Okay? Look at the little pegs on top of the Lego brick. They're perfectly circular. Okay? They're generated with some low polygonal cylinders, and then with some just strategic placement of some edge loops in the tab key, we're able to transform them into a subdivision surface and yield the result that you're seeing on screen. Okay? That is the goal. That is the goal. There's a number of different ways that you can do this. Subdivision surfaces do need to be applied for this project. Okay? This is going to be a 100% sub-D object, so I'll let you guys explore the technique and explore your own construction methods to get this result. Okay? You can have fun with this one. I want you to have fun with this one. This is going to be a nice, small, simple little assignment. If you look at some of the other creative applications of the tools here, here's another cool Lego brick. Love it. Okay? And then the third one, I like the third one. It's kind of like Lego brick, hinge. It's Lego hinge. It's brick hinge. Okay? Which I think is kind of neat. Okay? One of the other things that I would like you guys to really look at this week, in addition to constructing all of this stuff, is how you're lighting them. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If you look carefully at the requirements of this assignment, I want you to use a shadow catcher and a studio environment preset. Now, I recognize firsthand that there are a few computers inside this lab that don't have the content installed on them. So if you're sitting in front of a machine that doesn't have content, go find a machine that does have the content. Okay? And then you get access to all these really cool goodies. Let me show you how to work with both of them. They're really kind of neat. Okay? So let me jump back over into Modo, and I think I'm just going to use my simple little thing here as an example. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Okay, let's put that 90 in there. There we go. And let's jump over into my render tab. Now, at the moment, this is what the default render environment looks like, right? We don't get any sort of indication of a ground plane. We don't see any shadows in there. It almost looks like my little cylinder thing here is floating in this endless gray environment. We know likey that. Okay, we want to have shadows. We want to have an interesting background that provides us with an opportunity to kind of replicate what we're used to seeing in like product shots. As if this was like an actual stupid little cup that someone photographed and was putting in a magazine. Well, the Modo preset system is pretty cool. It's really strong. It allows us to quickly navigate and find some really great presets that allow us to add this kind of illusion into the mix. In 601, your left-hand side of the interface is a preset browser. It's this section over here, and I'm just going to make it bigger so you guys can see it a little bit easier. At the top of your preset browser, there's a navigation kind of pull-down menu. It works very, very similarly to the profile browser that we were looking at earlier today. So this middle drop-down menu will allow you to very quickly travel vertically within your preset library. And I'm going to go to environments because I want to use a studio environment. And this is going to change the background of our scene. So we'll go into environment. Let's make the folders bigger. Okay. Now, some of these you're not going to have. The splash kit, that's something that doesn't come with the content. This is an additional add-on to Modo that I purchased outside of the original content. But check it out. We have an entire folder here called Studio. Okay. If you double-click on it, it's going to show you a whole bunch of studio environment presets that you're free to use and you're encouraged to use. Okay. Double-clicking on any one of these little presets is automatically going to load that preset into your environment. Check it out. Maybe I want to use this 3-point blue background. So if I was to double-click on it, yeah, Now we have a cool little environment for us to play in. And if I navigate around the scene, you can actually see that there's a beginning and an ending point. Okay. However, these studio presets are best paired with the global illumination system. So if we were to turn on global illumination by going into the red render or the purple render sphere, and inside of our properties tab, global illumination, let's just enable it. Now, the color of that environment is going to influence the shading of that object within the scene. Now, it's a little intense at the moment, so if I turn off my directional light, we'll get a much better render. So use these studio presets. Explore how these studio presets are going to change your render and your scene. I like to audition them. Maybe just double click on the green one. It's going to load the green one in the background. Or maybe the Softbox 01. It's going to give you a much different look and a much different feel. It's phenomenal. It's a lot of fun, and I think you're really going to enjoy working with the studio presets. There's no reason, and I mean no reason whatsoever, to render your scenes anymore without either the inclusion of one of these studio presets or outdoor and indoor environment presets that are in the other folders. There's no reason not to have a decent looking render going forward. It's just as easy as finding the icon that you want to work with and double clicking on it. Modo takes care of the rest. However, the one thing that we're not getting here, and let's do, I don't know, red grid lights. That's kind of rad, or they're kind of orange. The one thing that we're still not getting is that ground shadow. Maybe I want to have my little cylinder here appear as though it's in this studio. Well, if we add in a shadow catcher, we can very, very quickly simulate this. So zoom in on my browser navigation thing here. Okay, so you can find this by going into meshes. So it's not in environments anymore. It's in the meshes section of your preset library. And then if you go into basic, I think I grabbed materials. I did. I apologize. I want meshes. There we go. And it's in basic. It's in the basic folder in meshes. And then there it is. It's called the shadow catcher. Watch what happens to my scene the moment I place a shadow catcher into my setup. Double click on it. And actually, it's working. I'm generating the shadow. However, if we look at its placement within the scene, and what it is actually nothing more than a gigantic plane, and that plane is intersecting my cool little cup. So let me go in, and it also adds a new item in the item list. So let me just grab my cup and kind of put it on top of the shadow catcher. Yeah, there it is. And now you can see the inclusion of these lovely, lovely, lovely soft shadows cruising along the bottom here. Okay. What's great about working with these shadow catchers is that they're not tied to that environment preset that we were working with before. So maybe my art director comes in and says, Pat, I love what you've crafted here. This is looking really great, but I don't like pink. Okay, I don't like that pink in the background. I want blue. Well, I go, okay, sure, no problem. Let me just open up my material library here, go in, or my preset library. Let me go into environments, studio. I'll grab the blue guy, double click on it, bam. As soon as it, or I didn't double click, there we go. As soon as it loads, we're off to the races, okay? These presets, especially the environment presets, kind of dial up the production value of our renders almost instantly. They're phenomenal. I love using them, and they work really well, okay? So use them, both the shadow catcher and the environment preset for your little lab assignment this week. Also, I would encourage you to start exploring all the other material presets that come inside the preset browser. There are a number of them. They're really kind of rad, okay? And they're a tremendous amount of fun. Just start exploring them. Next week, we're going to talk about their application and their role, I think, a little bit more in detail, okay? So this week's lab assignment is a Lego brick, and you have to use, or I'm really expecting you to apply the shadow catcher and apply one of those studio environment presets. In addition, please note that the render size for this week's lab assignment is 1280 by 720. At the conclusion of this lab assignment, I would like you to save out a render as a JPEG. In addition, upload your LXO, your Luxology project file, to the Dropbox that's associated with this assignment. Now, for you enterprising individuals that are really into the modeling side, I've given you a little hidden Mickey here inside that red screenshot, or that red image that you have down here. This is for the folks that really, really want to take it to the next level. If you really want to kick it up to 11, kick up your model up to 11 and have it be all one contiguous piece, that's a little suggestion on some number of structures, some number of polygonal structures that will allow you to do this. So if you want the little nubs of your Lego brick to be physically attached and modeled to the base, use that as a guide. I've given you three different cylinder counts here, or sides. So this is that is not 10. Excuse me. This is 8. So that if you're starting with an 8-sided cylinder, this is inspiration. Okay. This is 10, and this is 12. There's no expectation to do this, but if you would like to, use this as a blueprint for how to connect the cylinders to the base. Okay. A little foreshadowing of what's to come. Okay. Questions? Questions on what we're doing for the lab assignment? Okay, real quick, before I let you guys start working on your lab assignment and while we're together as a class, let's talk for a second about your homework. Homework this week is another fun assignment. It's a stoplight. It's due at the beginning of the class next week. The stoplight is going to give you an opportunity to flex your muscles using subdivision surfaces by focusing it on both cylinders and cubes. Okay? If you look at some of the examples that I've shown you down below, the stoplight project is going to allow you, here's a great one. The stoplight project is going to allow you to continue working with sub-Ds and yield a pretty good looking result. This entire mesh was made with subdivision surfaces. Okay? All of the examples that are come on the homework page are made with subdivision surfaces. We do not want to see any polygons anymore. We don't want to see faceted edges. Use the technique that we established earlier today to influence how you're constructing and where you're placing all these edge loops so that when you do hit the tab key, everything retains its original shape. Okay? The biggest benefactor of subdivision surfaces are these little hoods that are going to go over the outside of your little stoplight. Okay? It's a great model. Take some inspiration from the models that you see in the example section of this week's assignment. In addition, one of the other things that I would like you guys to begin to do, here's another great example. In addition, one of the other things that I would like you guys to begin to do is think about little scenes for your objects to go within. We're not just making a stoplight for a stoplight's sake. We also want to start thinking about where this stoplight would actually exist in our universe, and then make a small little scene that we can use in the render. Here's a great example of that. Okay? Because how often are you going to render just a stoplight by itself? 0 times. Okay? We're always going to want to see some sort of building or a tree or something in the background to give that stoplight context. So I want you guys to make a very simple little scene. And if you look here, what the artist has done, he's crafted a very simple scene with a whole bunch of cubes, and he's intelligently projected some photographs onto those cubes to make those cubes look like buildings. Same with the concrete and the asphalt on the ground. You don't necessarily have to do this, but I think it's an example of a direction that you could go in. I want you to think about a scene. As we start to get more and more complex inside the art of 3D modeling, it becomes less and less about the object and more about a scene that we can use to take a pretty picture. Okay? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's all we're doing inside of 3D modeling, is that we're going to render something to make a picture. That's it. Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have the magical, technological ability, the ability of like Tony Stark to have all like our 3D models like show up in a hologram in front of us and like spin them around, check them out from all different angles. We don't have that yet, so we're going to be showing people our work in 2-dimensional pictures that we render out of Modo. How we render it out and the composition of our scene is going to draw focus to the awesome models that populate that little scene. Okay. Each week, we're going to add a little bit more complexity into the scenes that we're going to be crafting. This week, have fun with it. Keep it simple. Keep it basic. Use some of those presets that we were talked about before and earlier today to kind of round out the quality of your scene and make something that showcases and highlights the role, the context, if you will, of this little stoplight. Okay? Questions? Everyone good? Everyone kind of understand let's go over some of the specific requirements of the stoplight assignment just so everyone's on the same page and everyone understands what I'm looking for you guys to build. Okay. Oops. All right. So, not only are you making one stoplight, you're actually making 3 stoplights. Okay, and specifically what I mean by stoplight, if you look carefully at the example that I've given you over here, that's a stoplight, that's a stoplight, that's a stoplight. Okay, yeah. So it's not like 3. So some people see they're like, is that like one stoplight? And I need 3 of them? No, the actual lights themselves are individual pieces. And if you look out in the real world, that's how they're actually constructed. They have the exact same, light, mounted 3 different times on one of those big, those big bars going across the street, right? So 3 different lights, okay? 3 different lights. Geometry for a simple scene, okay? Keep it basic, keep it basic. And of course, now that we're becoming a little bit more comfortable with adding materials and textures, everything has to have a material and a texture on it, okay? Directional light, that's the default light in the scene, okay? Default light, you don't have to change anything, just the default light that comes in the scene. Please turn global illumination on and ensure that you're rendering at 1280 by 720 and generating a JPEG at the conclusion, okay? When you're done, please make sure you're rendering out your scene and saving your render and your project file to the Dropbox on D2L.
Isn't global illumination is standard on 7?
On 701, it's already on. If you're doing it here, you have to physically go in and enable it. Yeah. Questions on what we're going to be doing for our homework? It's due by the beginning of the class next week. It's also worth 50 points, so please make sure you remember that as you go through this next week. As always, or not as always, but this week I've also given you guys a cool little time-lapse video that illustrates my process for making the stoplight. So check it out. Is it the corkboard? Okay, so I must have had butterfingers when I was adding the link. I'll change that here real quick, and it should be updated by the time we leave class today. Okay?
And the stream, your YouTube stream video, when is that going to be finished uploading?
For today's?
Yeah, because I'm going to have to rewatch the whole thing.
So, it's live now. All the live streams are archived to YouTube when I'm done. So as soon as I hit the stop button, YouTube starts turning it on. Now to help you out, I recognize firsthand that watching a 3-hour live stream is probably not something that a lot of people are going to do, but it is a good visual reference, kind of like notes, okay, for what we went over. So to help you out, if you look at the resources section, I've added a whole series of videos that encapsulate everything that we've talked about today. The most important one in this list is the Creating Subdivision Surfaces video. I think that's the most clearest, the most direct video that talks about the core concepts of subdivision surfaces and the construction principles that we went over in class. And it's not 3 hours long. I think it's maybe like 15 or 20 minutes long, okay? So if there's one video to watch, that would be it, okay? Questions? Brandon, you look as though you have a question.
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. What's up? Anything else? All right, so we got about 25 minutes left in class. Let's use this time to start working on our lab, working on our homework.